Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this special edition of Eyewitness News Investigates. I'm Stacey Rasmussen, in for Searles Valley. This week marked 5 years since two powerful earthquakes struck near Ridgecrest, shaking Kern County and much of the region. Cameras were rolling the moment the tremor hit, showing the violent shaking with items falling off of shelves and people running to safety. The first of the two quakes struck at 10:33 in the morning on the 4th of July. It was centered northeast of Ridgecrest near the small San Bernardino County community of Trona. That's nearly 130 miles away from Bakersfield. Morning newscasts in Los Angeles were on the air at the time of the shaking.
10:35 in Southern California. Maybe you just felt it. We certainly did here in Hollywood. An earthquake just rumbling through Southern California. In fact, I feel like our desk is still moving slightly.
Wait, what's going on?
Are you serious?
Your first earthquake. That's an earthquake?
At that time, it was the largest earthquake in nearly 3 decades in California. It was until the second quake, the magnitude 7.1, hit the same area the next day, July 5th at 8:19 p.m.
Get under the table, get under the table. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
The shaking was intense and was felt as far away as Arizona. Amazingly, nobody was seriously injured in the immediate area of the quake's epicenter. However, there was one death associated with the earthquake hundreds of miles away in Nevada. We'll have more on that later on in our broadcast. Now, even 5 years later, the city of Ridgecrest is still recovering from those damaging quakes. Some living there are still traumatized by the historical event. Investigates anchor Searles Valley gives us a closer look at how Ridgecrest itself was still able to persevere from the violent tremors.
It set this fear into us because you have one big earthquake and then you have a bigger earthquake. You're always afraid of the next big one coming.
5 years ago, on the 4th of July, Southern California was rattled by one of the largest earthquakes seen in the past 2 decades. From the desert of Las Vegas to the city of Los Angeles, thousands of people felt the rumble of the 6.4 earthquake that struck just after 10:30 in the morning. The desert community of Ridgecrest was one of the communities to get hit the hardest. Current mayor of the city, Eric Bruin, recalling the first quake.
You go from the idea of that earthquake, that initial shock and awe, to now a fear factor because the next one was larger. Well, was the next one going to be even worse?
A little over 24 hours just after 8:15 p.m., a 7.1 magnitude earthquake was on the horizon, and it was stronger. People bracing for impact as they had no idea how long the tremors would last. Over the 2 days, several house fires broke out, roads split, and dozens of people's houses were cluttered with debris. It led to a remarkable sight Bruin says he'll never forget.
It was weird. I mean, you drive down streets and you see little encampments. And those are the first couple days.
No casualties were reported in the city of Ridgecrest, only a few minor injuries.
What I've seen now, years now being separated from it, we've moved long past that fear, but we still have some of the scars around.
Here at Trousdale Estates in Ridgecrest, it holds just some of the few remnants of that earthquake. Now, as you can see behind me, this mobile home is just one of the many in this estate that have been red tagged. The windows have been boarded off and it's just standing on stilts 5 years later.
Code enforcement also moves very, very slowly, unfortunately. So our ability to abate those or to remove them is a very slow process. And COVID certainly didn't help accelerate that in any way.
Bruin says Ridgecrest didn't have enough damages to qualify for FEMA. So many places are stuck in time. Like the Sierra Lanes Bowling Center. This landmark was in the community for over 30 years. It was forced to close due to the building's damage. It's an eerie sight because the building remains, but no one can use it. Meanwhile, Ridgecrest Cinema survived for the most part. Amanda Acom, the former assistant manager at the time, was in the building during the first quake.
Well, the very first day, things were obviously behind me at the snack bar were disarray, dirty, drinks had fallen, glass was broken.
To give the crews time to clean, the owner closed the cinemas for the day. A decision that potentially saved the lives of many as part of the building's roof collapsed during the 7.1 magnitude earthquake. It destroyed one of the theaters in the building.
Seeing that was really scary, a shock, and a blessing that no one was here, that we did stay closed.
People still go to the cinemas to watch blockbuster films, but the remnants of the earthquake still linger. The roof has since been reconstructed, but the theater that was impacted remains closed. Ridgecrest was able to recover in other areas, and you'd never guess what the city went through.
Now we stand back and we look at this 5 years later, and I can go, look at how much we've been able to accomplish.
Leslie Valle, Eyewitness News.
And one place that took the brunt of the quake was China Lake Naval Base in Ridgecrest. The aftermath of the earthquake left billions of dollars worth of damage. Lena Folk has more on the repairs made and how the base is working to move forward.
The moment when the earthquake hit, it was really pretty terrifying, actually, when the ground was shaking and everybody was scared. It seems like it's going on forever, and you're just wondering when it's going to stop. And is it going to get any worse?
July 4th and 5th, 2019. A celebratory time for many around the nation, but in Ridgecrest, these days are remembered as the two earthquakes reaching magnitudes of 7.1 and 6.4.
It was just chaos inside of all the buildings.
After receiving recovery efforts totaling around $3.8 billion, one of the communities rebuilding 5 years later is the Navy's largest single land holding, the China Lake Naval Base. Established in 1943 during World War II, the base is a hub for Navy research, testing, and weapon building.
People come here because they get their hands on the technology. They get to see it in action, and they get to deliver it to the warfighters.
However, after the 2019 quakes, the base was marked not mission capable.
There was a tremendous amount of damage that was on the base. So the priority was, okay, how are we going to continue with the mission, and how are we going to take care of our people and get things back up and running?
Among the crumbled infrastructure laid the remnants of the base's chapel, which Chief Engineer Curtis Davis says is a sentimental landmark.
It was actually split in half. You could see outside of the chapel from the inside of the chapel, and it was devastating to the community because many people had been married in that chapel and had their services in there and funerals for families.
With a rebuilt chapel, updated facilities such as a new chemistry lab, renovated fitness centers featuring a pool, gym, and basketball court, officials say the base's updates will improve the quality of life for community members and allow for future developments and testing.
Buildings degrade over time. And so these new modernized buildings will provide them the space they need, the new techniques, the new equipment that they need to continue to do their job.
This is all brand new, so this is an Embron glove box. I can weigh things out into scale. I can use solvents to dissolve reagents, do reactions. We really can do a whole lot of things in this particular lab. It's exciting.
In December 2019, then Congressman Kevin McCarthy's office secured $1.15 billion in planning to reconstruct the base. McCarthy also authorized an additional $64.5 million for the base's runway and taxi extensions.
It's surreal that not even 5 years after the damage was done, that not only are we starting to move back in the facilities, but that we've been using some of them for already over a year.
Captain Ben Wainwright did not witness the earthquake, but since arriving to the base 2 years ago, he has been impressed by the community's speedy collaboration.
Our secret to success was just the teamwork. We had strategic alignment amongst senior leaders in Washington, D.C., and just a really outwelling of support from the community, too.
Wainwright told Eyewitness News the reconstruction is about 85% complete. He says the base should reach the finish line by the end of 2025.
We need to move fast here at China Lake because we are critical to supplying our nation, our joint force across the nation, and our allies with the weapons they need.
Although the base's officials say the quality of life was briefly disturbed after the quake, they are proud of their teamwork to reconstruct and immensely grateful no one died.
History has been made here, and now with the investment to rebuild after the earthquake, history will continue to be made here.
Lena Folk, Eyewitness News.
And as we mentioned earlier, the quakes were centered near the community of Trona, leaving a lasting impact on that small mining town. Its population, a little more than 1,000, and is located just outside of Kern County, about a half an hour from Ridgecrest. Will Silverstein headed to Trona to speak with those impacted by the devastating quakes.
There's a big change from when I grew up. You know, it's a dying town.
Marilyn McKee with the Searles Valley Historical Society spent her formative years in Trona and returned about 10 years ago. She said that dying town had been dying long before the quakes, but the rubble the 6.4 and 7.1 magnitude earthquakes caused on the 4th and 5th of July in 2019 just cemented that image of Trona. McKee remembers the shakes vividly.
After the 7.1, We had so many earthquakes for the next hour and 45 minutes. We were out in the street doing this the whole time, and Caltech can't even record how many earthquakes we had. We were here for 3 weeks after that, and we had an earthquake every half an hour.
Just across the street from the Historical Society from where we were talking to Marilyn, this business not quite as lucky. You can still see these cracks in the wall. That business, since that 2019 earthquake, had to move out.
I had my grandson in my hands and my arms, sitting on the ground with him going, "Is it over yet?" I said, "Not yet, just hang on," and just shaking like crazy on the ground.
Janice Reborg is from nearby Shafter and has been happily living in Trona for the last 15 years. Luckily, Reborg's home was not destroyed or noticeably broken by the twin quakes.
A lot of people had the other story. Their house was cracked in half, things fell apart. They were devastated. They had to leave the area because it's all they had.
The town suffering damage still noticeable today. Last year, Trona residents suffered yet another disaster that ravaged some homes and roadways. Tropical Storm Hillary.
We had a huge sinkhole this way. We had a flooded canyon that way. You can't get out of town.
Despite a lack of FEMA dollars, the once dwindling community pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and people helped each other recover. There were no deaths and only a few injuries. In fact, both Reborg and McKee say they get plenty of new neighbors in Trona. Trona's a town Reborg says she loves living in and can deal with more earthquakes should they start rattling again.
It's like people that have tornadoes. You get used to it. You know what's coming sooner or later, and if you prepare yourself, you can get through it.
McKee says the mining town she grew up in has changed mostly for the worse, but those neighbors in crisis make it a lot better.
The people got together. Everyone helped everybody out and went and cleaned up other people's homes.
You say you either loved it or you hated it. Where are you right about now?
Oh, about Trona? Oh, we love Trona.
Again, that was Will Silverstein reporting. Still ahead, the quakes were devastating, but beneficial lessons were learned by first responders, how it helped them improve technology. Plus, we're also reflecting back on the twin quakes with the former reporter who was on the ground of the epicenter. Our conversation with Tim Johns after the break. Welcome back to Twin Quakes. 5 years later, in the immediate aftermath of the quakes, Eyewitness News had several crews on the ground in Ridgecrest as well as Trona, bringing you the latest information and stories of survival. One of those covering this story was former Eyewitness News reporter Tim Johns, who spent several days in the area. Leslie Valle spoke with him this week, reflecting back on that time.
Tim, hi there, welcome. I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.
Of course, and now we're going to get right into it. So you were sent to Ridgecrest in the days after the first earthquake. Tell us, how was the overall emotion of the community once you got there?
Yeah, so I remember I was actually at home in Bakersfield when the quake first struck, and I'm not a native Californian, so it was maybe a bit more of a shock to me than it was to some folks who are from the state. But I remember just the intensity of it was so extreme. Obviously, we had other earthquakes throughout the years, we've all experienced them, but this one obviously felt like it was very, very large and very, very consequential. So cut to the next day, obviously I'm back at work, I'm reporting, we're all going out there. And as we were driving out, I just remember seeing, some of the devastation. There were cracks on the freeways, there were rock slides, there were, just other signs of damage. I remember there was a fire, and it became very evident very quickly that this earthquake was different than anyone's we had done previously.
Now, you're mentioning some of the damages that were done, even fires. Some of the buildings, like the bowling alley, if you might remember, and even multiple mobile homes could not be repaired, and they couldn't even be abated up until this day. Is that something that you had expected while speaking to officials, looking at the ongoing days and all the damages?
So I do remember the bowling alley and some of the other buildings in particular had very significant damages. At the time, they were still kind of assessing just how much was going to be done. And you also have to remember, initially the first one, we thought we were one and done, and then there was a big aftershock. So there was still a lot of uncertainty of how many aftershocks we were going to have and if those aftershocks were going to create more and more damage. I do, however, also remember speaking to officials, the mayor at the time, the police, that they were under the assumption that we were going to rebuild, right? Like we didn't know how long that would take. We didn't know what financial costs that would entail. But the hope and you know, the aim was we would get this city back on its feet and moving to the way it was prior to the earthquake happening.
And then months later, COVID hit, and the current mayor even said that backtracked a lot of the reparations and trying to get things back into how they were back then. You went out there, I want to say a few months even afterwards, just continuing looking, and things were still also crumbled, left from that earthquake. I spoke with the current mayor now, and he told me that Ridgecrest eventually did not end up qualifying for FEMA. Is that something that shocks you after witnessing the damages?
Yeah, that is actually very shocking. I know, I remember I went out there 6 months after it happened. And we also went to the town of Trona, which is a tiny little town about 20 miles outside of Ridgecrest. We talked to a family, elderly family, and their home had basically been destroyed. They had children, but those children lived down in Los Angeles, or I think one lived out of state, and these folks were really on their own. And we met with them when this had first happened. Their house had been red tagged, even though they were still living in there because they really had nowhere else to go. And they were trying to figure things out. 6 months later, we go back, and their home had still basically had no repairs. They didn't get any assistance from FEMA. I know they had tried things through the state and through the county, but to no avail. And ultimately, yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of a shock for all of us, for those in the news community, for those in the community of Ridgecrest and Trona itself, that there wasn't more help seemingly readily available for these folks. And the help that was available, it did seem like they had to jump through a whole bunch of hoops, which at a time when, you know, your whole world is quite literally crumbling, that's difficult to navigate.
It really was just a devastation from all the archival footage of what we saw and what we're seeing now. A few of the things that the mayor had also mentioned is you look at the town now and you look at the outside and you don't really seem to see a lot of the damages that there were, but except those few places, those homes, or even those mobile homes that still to this day have those red tags. It really is something, you know, kind of like the ghost of those two twin quakes right there. Really is something.
I think that's a testament to just the will and the determination of the folks who live there. It is a very strong community. You know, they're a bit isolated from other communities in Kern County. They really have a strong sense of identity. And it was palpable even back then that they did want to rebuild, they did want to get back on their feet, and that they wouldn't let this natural disaster kind of derail the good things that they had built there.
Well, former reporter, Eyewitness News, Tim Johns, thank you so much for taking the time to reflect with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And still ahead on our special broadcast, following the quakes, first responders took notes on how to better themselves and life-saving technology. The lessons learned after this. Welcome back in, everyone. As we mentioned at the top of this broadcast, sadly, there was one death connected to the first earthquake that struck on July 4th, 2019. A man who was working underneath his vehicle in Nye County, Nevada, was killed after the car was knocked off of its jack from the tremor. Officials discovered the 56-year-old man several days later. And the quakes were also an opportunity for lessons to be learned by first responders, including seismologists. It's helped them make improvements to earthquake detection technology. Leslie Molina has that part of our coverage.
For many, the 4th of July is a time for celebration, but for others, the holiday brings up some not so joyous emotions.
Get under the table, get under the table. Oh my God.
It has now been 5 years since 6.4 and 7.1 magnitude earthquakes hit the city of Ridgecrest.
It was an interesting incident for the fact that it came at a time of the year that, as a department, we were already extremely busy.
There will be a wide variety of services.
Andrew Freeborn with the Kern County Fire Department was there that day and told Eyewitness News the department's resources were put to the test.
When you have already, because of the holiday, a heightened amount of emergency activity, and then you combine that with an earthquake, you really see how thin the resources can get.
4th of July is already the busiest time of year for the department. Add to that a few earthquakes and then having to put out several fires, the resources were stretched thin. What a lot of people do not know is that earthquake protocol is not that much different than responding to a wildfire.
And so the lesson learned for us is that the policies and training we have in place, it definitely works.
But the department did encounter some uncharted territory.
In Ridgecrest, the largest of the earthquakes wasn't the first one. We now know the term foreshock.
We've all heard of aftershock before. It is those smaller quakes that happen after the big main one. But what exactly is a foreshock? Seismologist Alan Husker told Eyewitness News a foreshock is an earthquake that happens before a larger one in the same location.
I don't know if this would be the right way to put it, but it's kind of foreshadowing.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
So in the Ridgecrest case, the 6.4 quake that happened on July 4th was a foreshock to the 7.1 magnitude one that happened a day later.
For my whole life, I always thought of once you have a large earthquake, you're just going to have a number of smaller earthquakes that follow that. You could have a large earthquake followed by an even larger earthquake.
Foreshocks are not unusual, but Husker says the one that happened in Ridgecrest is unique.
Typically, we think of a foreshock happening on the same fault, and in this case, it wasn't on the same fault. It was on a separate fault that was almost perpendicular to the main fault.
This jumping of fault lines has been a point of fascination for scientists, and according to Husker, is similar to an earthquake that happened in Turkey.
And this is actually one of the concerning things, specifically for Bakersfield, is you have the Garlock Fault, which is really close to Bakersfield. It's a very big fault, and also the San Andreas.
Luckily, earthquake technology has improved over the last 5 years. Fiber optic cables, those that help bring internet to your home, can also sense earthquakes. There are also apps like My Shake, which give people a few seconds of early warning before a major one happens. And if an earthquake does happen, drop, cover, and hold on. But Freeborn said the biggest lesson people should take out of this is the importance of being prepared. Always have a stock of non-perishable food, water, and a first aid kit ready.
Once the earthquake hits, if you haven't taken those steps, you're going to be more than inconvenienced.
Leslie Molina, Eyewitness News.
And when we come back, we'll have more on how you can get information that could save your life in a natural disaster. Welcome back. As Leslie Molina mentioned earlier, there is an app that you can download on your phone right now to give you a heads up on when an earthquake is about to hit. The My Shake app is designed to instantly send out a warning, giving people up to several seconds to take cover before the strong seismic wave strikes. The app debuted in 2019 and has since been improved to better measure the strength of a quake. The app is free for download. And officials here locally also remind people to sign up for Kern County's emergency alert program. It's called Ready Kern. The notification system provides important information to residents on earthquakes, severe weather, as well as fires. It's been used recently to let people know of evacuation alerts. You can sign up for Ready Kern at kerncountyfire.org. The service is also free. And that's going to do it for our show here tonight. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Stacey Rasmussen, and from all of us here at Eyewitness News, have a great night.